I hope will encourage you today, wherever you're at in your faith journey. And like I said, if you're watching online, maybe you're tuning in for the first time. If you're not a church person, I hope this is something in here will encourage you. If you are familiar to faith and, maybe wherever you're at in your journey, whether you're in a good space or a hard space, I hope this word will encourage you. And, it's really easy in tough seasons, like we have all been through in one way, shape, or form, where you're surrounded by a lot of can'ts, don'ts, shouldn'ts, all of this stuff. It's really easy to kind of just let that stuff, like you don't mean to, but you kind of just get pulled into it. Anybody else experience this? It's so easy for those things to affect our focus, to affect our attention, to affect our expectation. And, even though you try really hard, like I found myself pulled into this space over the last year and a half where you try really hard not to get overwhelmed. And it's this love-hate relationship with social media because you're kind of like a pastor and you want to connect with people because that's where people go, but yet you hate it with a passion. Anybody have like a love-hate relationship with Facebook or anything social media? It's just kind of like, I love you because you're so cool and I get to connect, but I hate you because of all the garbage. Like, anybody else feel defiled after you're on it? Just like, It's just like, And there's some people, it's like, you're my great friends, but I need to unfollow or mute you because I still want to love you. You're getting an inside picture of the pastor's head, Your pastors are much better than I am. That's just where my head goes. But you don't want to get overwhelmed by the fear and the drama. And you try so hard to avoid it, the negative news. Or, where even this last year, it's also felt like you're trying to stay really positive when everything is spinning out of control. And we dubbed the past year, anybody Disney? Disney people, anybody been to Disney? Mr. Toad's Wild Ride? If you've ever been on Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, if you haven't, I advise you not to, especially if you have neck problems. Because it's like you're just whipped around and it just felt like that. You don't know if you're going up or you're going down or you're going right or you're going left or forward or backwards or whatever. It's just like, It's kind of like, I feel like some of the emotional side of that has seeped into my neck in the last couple months. We don't want to, but we find ourselves getting pulled into the current of the world around us. And I call it, we get stuck in street level living or street level faith. And where we forget, or maybe we just don't know, that our lives are actually part of a bigger story that's written and guided and directed by a greater than God. And see, that's what's surrounding our life. That is the true narrative. I don't care what the narrative of our news says. I don't care what the narrative of the professionals or so-called professionals is. We as God's children, as the people of God, as those following Jesus Christ, we have over our lives a different narrative that is a truer narrative than the one we're surrounded in. And we need to remind ourselves, we're not stuck in street level faith. We're not stuck in street level living. So I've got a few thoughts on how to live beyond street level faith. How to live beyond street level faith. So to get started, before I jump into the story, we're going to practice what I call retro VR. Do you know what retro VR is? Close your eyes and use your imagination. Okay, that's what we're doing. So close your eyes, play along with me. We're not going to do anything weird to you. Online, you can close your eyes too and just pretend or whatever. Hopefully you're listening. But I want you to close your eyes. And I want you to imagine you're blind. You're sitting next to a busy road. It's hot. It's dusty. Smell of animals and poo. Soon you hear noise and shouts. And you start to feel the ground vibrate. And then you start getting really nervous and your heart starts to beat because you feel this thundering noise get louder coming your direction. You panic because getting trampled is a very real possibility. And then you hear feet running by you and you hear somebody yell, Jesus, Jesus. Okay, you can keep your eyes closed if you want to, or you can open them. And I'm reading Mark 10, starting in verse 46. As Jesus was leaving Jericho, Together with his disciples and a sizable crowd, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus was sitting beside the road. When he heard that Jesus of Nazareth was there, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, show me mercy." And Jesus stopped and said, "Call him forward." They called the blind man. "Be encouraged, get up, he's calling you." Throwing his coat to the side, he jumped up and he came to Jesus, and Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" Kind of a dumb question to ask a blind man, hey? Jesus is so funny that way. Do everybody else read through the Gospels and the stories of Jesus and you just kind of go, "What are you asking that for, Jesus? You're kind of funny." The blind man said, "Teacher, I want to see." And Jesus said, "Go, your faith has healed you." At once he was able to see and he began to follow Jesus on the way. So, I got a few takeaways for us on Bart's experience, because we're actually more like Bart than what we might realize. You don't have to be blind to be blind. Oh man, I love that song, you know, time to wake up, sleeper. And all through scripture, all through both the Old and New Testament, the metaphor or the connection between blindness and sleeping was very strong. And so, you know, even as we're singing that song, you know, wake up, it's just like it's time to wake up. We've been blind, we got our blind eyes. So we're more like Bart than what we might realize. Because first of all, believe it or not, blind Bart, he had a very lucrative job. Because if you were going to be a beggar, you needed a very visible handicap in order to get you a lot of money. People needed to feel sorry for you. So if you were a blind man, you're almost a shoo-in. It's just kind of like you had it made. You just had to have somebody find you, put you on a spot where you could sit, where people would see, they would feel sorry for you, and they would throw money in your coat. So basically, he had a really good job. But as a blind man, he also would have had no education, no skill, no trade, not really any other experience that we know of. So if you think about it, it actually would have been easier for Bart to just stay as he was. Blind, no education, no skills, no experience. How are you going to get a job and provide for yourself? So it would have been much easier for him to remain as he was. And I think this is one of the spaces or one of the ways that we can relate most to Bart. Because the longer we're in something, or the longer we're in a particular circumstance, the longer we're surrounded by a certain existence or a certain way of living, the longer we're in something, the easier it is to stay there. Hello? Isn't that true? Anybody else find this? It's like the longer you're there, it's just like, oh, I'm kind of getting my groove, you know? And it's just like, I haven't found this over the last year. And I won't say it because we're online. I won't say what I was or was not doing. But I just found even when, you know, the restrictions were off, I felt standing in line when people got a little bit closer than the 6 feet, and I was so not that way at all. I'm like hugging people. But it's like you feel weird. It's like, oh, you're in my space because you're like 5 feet and not 6 feet away. You know, it's just easier. The longer you're in a certain circumstance, the more comfortable we get, the more familiar it is, and the easier it is to stay there. And so here is our first takeaway. Number one, street level living, in other words, living in the flow of the world around us might be easier, but do we really want to look at butts for the rest of our life? Do you really want to look at butts for the rest of your life? And you can take that butt whatever way you want to spell it, with 2 T's or 1. Can you imagine Bart telling his story a different way? Yeah, you know, I once was close to Jesus, but, you know, I was kind of too scared. He walked by me. I couldn't see him. Maybe he would have healed me, but I was too scared. I thought about it, but man, it would have been so hard to find a new job and to learn how to work. Here's something to think about. When Jesus showed up, Do you actually think he would have seen Bart? I don't think so. Blind beggar along the roads, there was a crowd. So the short guy sitting on the ground probably would have been blocked out by all of the crowd that was with Jesus and following Jesus. And see, Bart could have easily missed his moment if he hadn't called out. Look, he says, Jesus, Son of David, show me mercy. Many scolded him, telling him to be quiet, but he shouted even louder, Son of David, show me mercy. And here's where this can connect with us. And here's my question. What do you need to start or resume calling out to God for? What do you need to start calling out to God for? What do you need to resume calling out to God for? You know, this is one of the crazy things in this last year. There were sometimes when you're in trauma, when you're in hard places, when you're just trying to make it through the next day or you're making decisions and on the fly, you know, it's hard. You kind of think like, prayer, like I don't have time to pray. You know, like I don't know if anything's going to happen if I pray. But I can't tell you, man, there were so many quick prayers and crazy prayers that God just seemed to answer in various ways over this past year. What do you need to start or resume calling out to God for? Jeremiah 33:3. God was telling the people, he said, call to me and I will answer you. I'll tell you marvelous and wondrous things that you could never figure out on your own. You know, it's one of the fun stories that this past year, we had one of our girls on our Edmonton location that was part of our team for a while, and she started, there was a guy that, she started dating this guy, and then, you know, we didn't see her for a while, and he was like not a Jesus follower at all, and he was, you know, kind of opposed to it, and I'm not going to church, da-da-da. Well, lo and behold, they started watching church online during the whole shutdown when we weren't able to meet, and he tells this story of, you know, here's this not a follower of Jesus, not a real believer in Jesus, and something clicked, and he just started calling out to God. He started praying. He had some health or some injury-related thing in his body, and he just prayed this simple prayer, and he goes, and he's the way he's telling me, God just healed me. He said it was so freaky. It was like one simple call out, and God healed him, and he goes, so I started praying all the time. And he said, God just kept answering my prayers. It's so crazy. And so once church, we were able to gather again, and he came out, and it's just great to see his story. But what moment do you need to seize? What do you need to grab a hold of? Bart would have missed his moment if he had not grabbed hold of it. See, lifting your voice to God is where things change. It's one thing, you know, and this is where it's so easy, man. How often, and this is where I've felt the conviction of God's Holy Spirit just poking me. It's like, really? Do you need to post that? Do you need to post that? Are you lifting your voice to me as much as you're lifting your voice up to other things? What moment do you need to see? Here's our second takeaway. Number 2, what seems like a setback, God can use to your advantage. What seems like a setback, God can use to your advantage. Look at it, it was the crowd. The crowd was saying, shut up, be quiet, stop calling. And here's the question, what's trying to crowd out your faith? What's trying to silence your faith, to keep you from believing that your life could be different, that your marriage could be healed, that your kids could come back? What's trying to silence your faith, to keep you from believing that your spiritual life could be more vibrant or that your soul could be free? See, limitations and disappointments are very real. And calling out to God isn't the way we just it's not putting our head in the sand and just ignoring them. They're very real, but all it takes is one word from God. Jesus, all he had to say, call him forward, call him forward, call him forward. I love that. Jesus stopped and said, call him forward. And this is where all it is, one word from God, all of the limitations, all of the restrictions that are working against you, trying to silence you, trying to silence your faith, trying to silence your hope, all of the things trying to crowd out your expectation that are trying to shut you up. The next minute, look at who was Jesus saying, call him forward to? He told the very thing, the crowds, he goes, call him forward. Jesus was able to use the very thing that was trying to silence his faith, trying to crowd him out, and he used that to bring Bart to himself. God is more than able to turn things around and to use them And we can't forget that people can change in an instant. Things can turn around in an instant, and we forget that. And I'm not saying everything works that way, because there is process. Process is part of our whole journey here on earth, and process is a part of character development and growth. But I think sometimes we get so caught up in process, and we live in a world that's all about process and this, and it takes time, that we forget that we are part of a greater than story. We've got a God who can turn things around in a moment. And I remember this even in our own world. Our son, our oldest, who this was, and his story is, he's okay telling this because he's told it himself on video now too, but about 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, how old is he? Maybe longer than that. 8 probably, 8 or 9 maybe now. And he was in high school. I know, it's just like the years are all mashed together. But, he took a sideways turn in high school and ended up going for about 6 years in a really dark direction. He was in the whole party drug culture. It was bad. And one of the greatest saving graces was that he moved away, so I didn't have to see it all the time. It was so hard. But I remember so clearly, and prayer, and I mean, if you have kids, if you have loved ones that you love that, are far from Jesus, maybe you can relate to this, and I want to encourage you, what, God can change things in a minute. And I remember one day he called, and he's like, Mom, can I come home? And we're like, absolutely, what do we need to do to get you here? And, a long story, and there was still a lot of process that he had to go through, but it was like out of the blue. I was not expecting that at all. There was no indication in my mind leading up to it. In fact, we were thinking that things were actually going a different direction, and it was just out of the blue. It was like, boom, one phone call changed everything. All it takes, one word from God, and things can turn around. God will use those things that were holding you back to move you forward and draw you to himself. You know what, even maybe for you, maybe it's been this past year relationships that have changed for you. Maybe you're not surrounded by friends or the same friend circle that you were before, because you find you have very different opinions on things. Or for whatever reason, people moved away, or you're just not surrounded. And you're like, it feels very disorienting. You know what, I can tell you, God can use, I know from personal experience. When I was about 21 years old, I had grown up as a pastor's kid, grown up in the church my whole life, but really didn't, I kind of prayed the Jesus come into my heart fire insurance prayer, because I didn't want to go to hell. Watched a horrible movie, those Left Behind movies? Yeah, it was terrible. Except it was before that. It was like the 1970s. And I actually saw it in the church you guys were in, up in Fort McMurray. I watched it. It was a big community movie, and I remember being so scared. It's like, I don't want to go to hell and have my head chopped off or whatever. It was stupid. But I didn't really follow Jesus. I had fire insurance, and that was it. And so when I was about 21, I moved back to Fort McMurray and was living there. And through a roundabout way, I was actually living outside of Fort McMurray. I was a nanny in a tiny little town where there was like 500 people, and I had no friends. None at all. And I'd gone from being surrounded by a really great group of friends to being surrounded by nobody. And that season was the greatest season of my life, because it was a season that God drew me to himself. And what seemed like this really sad time and could have been very depressing on a lot of fronts was actually the greatest time of my life up until that point, because that's where God completely altered my life. You know what, or maybe this season has been a season of losses for you. Loss in terms of maybe lost business, lost your job, lost other experiences, or the things that you were counting on. This is what I've learned. Losses can be losses, or you can call them seed. And see, when you call things seed, God promises to bring return. When we plant in tears, we reap in joy. What we sow in mourning, and we sow in pain, and we sow in heartbreak, and even if it was taken from you, you can say, that was not taken. I'm calling it seed. It is a seed planted, and seed comes back in greater return. Let's remind ourselves that God is a forward-moving God, and he is moving us forward even when it doesn't look like, even when it looks like things are going backwards, he is moving us forward into his plans, not ours. So what looks like a setback, God is using to bring you forward. Here's number 3. Here's a great question. What do you need to put off? What do you need to put off? Look at the person beside you. Ask them, what do you need to put off? What do you need to put off? What do you need to put off, Church Online? Don't take it off now. You know what? There's a thing. Well, actually, you could. You're at home, whatever. Do whatever you want. You know, there's a thing that script writers use. It's called an inciting incident. Anybody know what an inciting incident is? It's a turning point. Usually it's an unexpected turning point that upsets the balance in a character's life that causes them to move forward or to make a change in a way they never would have had that event not occurred. For example, Star Wars fans. I heard there are Star Wars fans in the house. I'm talking the original, 1976 or 7 version. Who can tell me, what was the inciting incident in Luke Skywalker's life? Online, do you know it? You can write it in the comments if you're watching. The inciting incident was his aunt and uncle getting killed by stormtroopers that set him on a course. What was Iron Man fans, Marvel fans? I love Iron Man. Oh, I want an Iron Man suit someday. I do. I hope we get them in heaven. Iron Man. The inciting incident in Tony Stark's life was when his convoy got blown up I think they were in Afghanistan or wherever they were. Jason Bourne, the inciting incident was when he was rescued, when he was shot and then lost his memory and they rescued him out of the water. It started a whole series of events. The inciting incident, without an inciting incident, the character doesn't change. The character doesn't move forward because there's nothing provoking them. And here is my question for every single one of us. Could it be that this past year and a bit, 20 and 21, God is using as the inciting incident to get us out of complacency, out of apathy, out of just being part of the crowd, out of just sitting on the sidelines, out of just continuing on in our blindness? Could it be the inciting incident, maybe even for the entire church on the planet, to get us out of complacency, to get us out of westernized consumerism, what's called Christianity, but really isn't? The inciting incident to get us out of our comfort and our complacency, to get us moving forward. Sometimes, man, we need stuff to throw us off balance. And as much as I loathed this past year, it was the greatest thing because it just upset so many things in a good way. It upset so many things, and you know what, maybe that wasn't your experience. Maybe you kind of sailed through the past year and it's been pretty good. You know what, I just want to throw this out there for consideration. Don't freak out if all of a sudden you start freaking out over the next couple months. Because some of us, we have this ability to kind of cruise through because you're made for hard stuff. But that doesn't mean it doesn't get in us. And then when things kind of start to slow down, then they go boom. So if you find in a couple months, you're kind of like, what's going on? It's normal. It's totally normal. You are okay. You're gonna make it. But we need stuff to throw us off balance. See, with Bart, his life was kind of routine. Get up, find your way, or have someone take you to the roadside, sit down, throw out your coat, beg, get up, go home, do the same thing over and over and over again. But the day Jesus came by completely disrupted his routine. And that is such a classic Jesus move. He just messes everything up. Get up! He's calling you to come. And I love this. Throwing his coat to the side. Look at this. Throwing his coat to the side, he jumped up and came to Jesus. And see, there's something very significant in Bart throwing off that cloak. He was throwing off the thing that protected him. He was throwing off the thing that brought comfort. He was actually throwing off the thing that identified him. He was throwing off his self-made identity to step into his God-made and God-ordained identity. He was also throwing off the thing that could easily trip him up. Hello, blind man, their coat, it was a long thing because when they threw it out, that's what they would collect all their money in, and then they draw it in, and then he'd put it on and go home. So he had this big coat. Blind man getting up to try to walk, like that's just a recipe for disaster. And my question is, what do we need to put off? Maybe even ask yourself, where have I gotten comfortable? It's comfort and familiarity. Is it holding me back from God's greater? What could trip me up maybe as we go forward? What could trip us up, team? What could trip us up as we go forward? What attitudes or beliefs or perspectives have we maybe inadvertently taken on in this past year? Maybe even as a way to just self-preservation and keep our sanity. But what thinking and attitude and beliefs do we need to put off because they're not going to carry us forward? What do we need to put off? And I really believe, man, in some ways, could this be the grace moment that God is giving us to deal with our stuff? You know, I love Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. Now, sin is one of those Bible words that's got some weird baggage because we think of bad moral things we shouldn't do. And while that is it, that word sin, hamartia, it means simply to miss the mark. So where have we missed the mark on all of those ways that we're missing the mark on keeping our cool, missing the mark on being faith-filled and positive? Where are we missing the mark on believing God's best instead of the worst? Where are we missing the mark on, being caught up in a narrative that is kind of sketchy? It's not true. Where are we missing the mark? We need to throw those things off. Number 4, here's the 4th takeaway. Act like you can see before you can see. You gotta act like you can see. You gotta act like Bart had to act like a seen person before he could actually see. He had to get off his mat and make his way to Jesus. Now that kind of sounds very cruel from a perspective. You're like, definitely not socially acceptable. Jesus, you should go to the blind man. Why would Jesus make the blind man walk to him? Right. Jesus did weird things. So what is God asking you to do to act on before it's a reality? Right. Where can you start praising God before that prayer is even answered? Do you need breakthrough in your marriage? Maybe you need to start loving and serving your spouse before they deserve it. So fun. Do you need a job? Well, here's some practical. Maybe you need to start working even though you might not have a job. Like, just go find a place where you want to work and show up every day and see what happens. Maybe they'll hire you. I had a friend that literally happened. She was not qualified for a job. She was bound and determined to get this job. She'd applied for it. She was the least qualified, and every day, for about 5 days, she kept calling in, have you hired yet? Have you hired yet? No, we haven't hired. The next day, have you hired? Have you hired? She did this every day for about 5 days, and finally the lady said, she goes, obviously, she said, I don't care how unqualified you are. You obviously want this job. I'm going to give it to you. And she had that job for I don't know how many years. It was a great job. Do you need friends? Maybe you need to start acting friendly. Do you need direction? Maybe you just need to do something. Take one step. What do you need to act like you can see before you can see? And this last one, and I'll go ahead and invite the band or the keys if you guys want to come up. We think we know what we want, but Jesus wants to bring us something more. We think we know what we want, but Jesus wants to bring us into more. I love how, look at what the blind man is calling out for. Jesus, Son of David, show me mercy. In other words, have pity. Show me some pity. I need help. Jesus, I need. Jesus, I need. Jesus, I need. And Jesus asked the question, what do you want me to do? That was a loaded question for Bart. Because Jesus was really asking, what do you really want, Bart? See, Jesus didn't just want to take care of Bart's need, which is very obvious. It was sight. Jesus didn't just want to take care of and bring a solution to his problem. Jesus wanted to bring him into something more. He wanted to give Bart an invitation to a brand new way of life, because that's what his healing would have meant. You will no longer be able to sit in your comfort, in your ease, in what's familiar, in what everybody else is taking care of you. You're now going to move into a new life where you're going to be a provider and a bringer of life and a bringer of provision and a bringer of hope and a bringer of encouragement to others through your life. What do you really want, Bart? And I think I love this. It's like he no more a beggar. And see, when Jesus, he healed him, when he said, Jesus told Bart, he said, go, your faith has healed you. But look at what it says in 10:52. It says, immediately Bart could see, and he began to follow Jesus on the road. He became a follower, not just a knower. See, Bart's previous experience of Jesus would have been all secondhand. He couldn't have seen Jesus. He would have only heard about or been aware of Jesus because others would have said, others would have told him, others would have proclaimed it like he heard on the road that day. Or others would have brought him to where Jesus was. His experience with Jesus, he knew who Jesus was. Son of David, which is weird that he would know that. So he had heard just enough about Jesus to know who Jesus was and to believe in Jesus. See, that term son of David was a very unique phrase. It was a statement of faith. You are the long-awaited son. You're the long-awaited Messiah. You're the one that our people have been waiting millennia for to come and rescue us. You're the one. So, Bart, he knew and he believed in Jesus, but he was not a follower. And I wonder, friend, why don't we just close our eyes? We're going to move in and I'm just going to pray in a minute, but I want you to just ask. And online, I want to invite you as well. And ask yourself this question: has my experience of Jesus been secondhand? Have I been engaged with him on the sidelines? Maybe he's even been doing some amazing things in your life. But today I'm asking, will you take the step to say yes and to become a follower? See, salvation is free. Jesus did everything. He paid the price. He did everything needed for us to step into the doorway called his new creation kingdom reality here on earth now. He paid the price. And he gives a gift, he extends it free. But following will cost you everything. And frankly, nothing worth really having comes without cost. And so I want to invite this whole room, and even online, if you're in a place where you're like, I don't know if I am really following. I want us all to pray together this prayer out loud. And the reason we pray this prayer out loud and as we sit home is because nobody prays alone. We don't want anybody to pray alone, but this is an opportunity. If you are not a follower of Jesus, maybe you know him, maybe you believe in him, maybe you don't with any of those, you can follow, because you can actually follow before you believe. And so can we pray this prayer together? Say, Jesus, thank you for everything that you have made possible for my life, for salvation. Jesus, I say yes to salvation life, to following you from this day forward. God, I thank you for a brand new start today. Amen.